Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 280 and this fight card on paper is one of the greatest UFC fight cards of all time. And in the featured fight on the main card, we have Petr Yan versus Sugar Sean O'Malley. And this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction of this amazing bantamweight matchup. And I've already done a bunch of UFC 280 predictions, and I'll be having a prediction come out for the main event, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title. I will link any videos I already have done down in the description, but make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss that Oliveira versus Makhachev prediction. So when you look at this bantamweight fight, this is one of the most compelling fights of the rest of the year. For me, this is probably top 5 most compelling fight for the entire rest of 2022, including title fights. I am absolutely dying to see this matchup. This is one of those rare fights where you have a guy who's ranked outside of the top 10 fighting one of the elite in the top 3, and in this case, ranked number 1 in the bantamweight division and a former champion. And this fight is so compelling for multiple reasons. First off, it's an interesting stylistic matchup, what we'll get to later in the video. But second off, this is a number 1 contender fight in my opinion. With Sean O'Malley's hype, with the fact that he's fighting the number 1 ranked guy in the world and a former champion in Petr Yan, if he goes out there and wins impressively, there is no doubt in my mind the UFC will give Sean O'Malley a title fight in his next fight. He will be fighting the winner of Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. And for Petr Yan, he's already ranked number 1. He's kind of doing the UFC a favor in a way by taking a fight outside the top 10, even though I believe it benefits him to end the hype of Sean O'Malley if he is able to win. And if he wins, I mean, who's going to say he doesn't deserve a shot? I know you kind of have Sandhagen and Vera kind of hanging out in the wings, but Petr Yan, former champion, kind of lost his belt controversially and then lost a close decision in the next fight for the belt against Aljamain Sterling, which we'll talk about in a minute. And, you know, how are you going to deny him a title shot if he goes out there and let's say he puts away Sugar Sean O'Malley and does it impressively? I don't think you can deny him a title shot. And this is the biggest test of Sean O'Malley's career. We were supposed to see questions answered about Sean O'Malley's skill set back when he fought Pedro Munhoz. It ended in controversy, and we really didn't get those answers. So now, you know, a lot of people were expecting UFC to book Pedro Munhoz versus Sean O'Malley too, and they didn't do it. And now we get to see Sean O'Malley essentially go from fighting trash cans to fighting the number 1 guy in the world. So shout out to Sean O'Malley for taking this fight. Shout out to Petr Yan for taking this fight. I cannot wait for this bantamweight matchup, and it's in my favorite division. I think the bantamweight division is the most stacked and skilled division in all the UFC. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, Petr Yan is 16-3, Sean O'Malley is 15-1. Yan is ranked number 1, O'Malley is ranked number 12 in the UFC official rankings. Yan is 29, O'Malley is 27. Yan is 5'7", O'Malley is 5'11". Yan has a 67-inch reach, and O'Malley has a 72-inch reach. So a 4-inch height advantage for Sean O'Malley and a 5-inch reach advantage for Sean O'Malley. So if you look at Sean O'Malley in his MMA resume, he has 15 wins, 1 loss, and of those 15 wins, he has 11 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, and 3 by decision. Of his 1 loss, he's been finished in his sole loss, which was in the UFC, which we'll talk about here in a minute. His last fight was against Pedro Munhoz. I touched on it a little bit ago. This was a fight that a lot of people were hyped for. This was finally the test for Sean O'Malley. He was fighting an elite level guy who was ranked in the top 15 of the division, which he hadn't up until this point. And we kind of left unsatisfied. We didn't really get any questions answered because the first round was relatively uneventful. Munhoz was chopping the legs. O'Malley checked some of them, but I thought Munhoz won the first round, but it was super uneventful. And then the second round was pretty uneventful. It was kind of the same thing. I think O'Malley landed a couple more punches in the second round. Munhoz continued to chop the legs, and then there was an eye poke, and then the fight ended. Munhoz could not continue. And I know a lot of people said, you know, including Sean O'Malley, was spinning the narrative and saying that Pedro Munhoz quit. This couldn't be further from the truth. He even released the medical documents that he had a detached retina. And, you know, it's just super unfortunate it ended this way. It's really nobody's fault, but it did suck. And I expected them to run this back, but instead, O'Malley's jumping in and fighting Petr Yan now. The fight before that was at UFC 269 against Raulian Paiva. He finished him in the first round. This was an impressive performance, But a lot of people going into this fight hyped up Raulian Paiva and pretended like he was some world beater. And that really wasn't the case. I don't really think this is all that great of a win for Sean O'Malley. Raulian Paiva's, a career flyweight, not the greatest of bantamweights. And O'Malley went out there and did what he was supposed to do to Raulian Paiva. Most people expected him to finish him in the first round. So not super impressive, but he did win by TKO. He caught him with a right hand and then just swarmed him with shots up against the fence and finished him off in the first round. The fight before that was at UFC 264 against Chris Montinho. If you're not familiar with who he is, he was signed solely to come in and take an ass whooping from Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley's original UFC 264 opponent pulled out of this fight, and Chris Montinho was signed to the roster on basically like a week's notice so he could step in against Sean O'Malley. And Sean O'Malley went out there and pretty much pieced him up from start to finish. But I actually thought this wasn't a great performance by Sean O'Malley. He eventually got the TKO in the third round. It was a weird stoppage. I understand it was based on accumulation, but if that was the case, it should have been stopped in the second round. Chris Montinho was kind of walking him down, getting pieced up, eating shots, but landing some shots of his own and chopping the legs of Sean O'Malley, which we've seen in a lot of his fights. And, even though O'Malley went out there and eventually finished him in the third round, to finish a guy in the third round, and it was arguably a controversial stoppage, and then, this is a guy that's been signed on 1 week's notice, and he's a flyweight, and he had one fight since then and got KO'd by, I think, like a 42-year-old fighter. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. It's not a great win. Chris Montinho is no longer in the UFC. I'm not even sure if Raulian Paiva is in the UFC anymore, but it's a win nonetheless. The fight before that was against Thomas Almeida. He brutally KO'd him in the third round. He dropped him. Should have been stopped right there. He followed up with a big right hand because the referee didn't jump in and put him out. But who was Thomas Almeida at that point in time? I mean, it's an okay win, but Thomas Almeida was basically a prospect in his early days. But at this point, everyone expected Sean O'Malley to win this fight. The fight before that, and the best fighter that Sean O'Malley has fought up until this point, was Marlon Chito Vera back at UFC 252 in August of 2020. And in this fight, again, this is another fight where Sean O'Malley is caught following, to spin the narrative. This was a 50-50 fight going into the, second half of the first round, I guess. And Marlon Vera brutally chopped the legs of Sean O'Malley, hit the nerve in his leg. O'Malley was kind of limping around. He gets shucked to the ground and then flash KO'd with brutal ground and pound elbows. And then he was stretchered out of the cage with no serious injury. Now, this isn't the worst loss to have because we've seen where Marlon Vera has gone since then. But still, this is the best competition he's faced. And he's lost, and he got finished via KO in the first round. Before that, he beat up Eddie Wineland by KO. What does that really mean? And before that, we're just talking basically his entire resume of wins is basically trash cans, okay? And that's why I'm super hyped to see him tested against Petr Yan. You look at Petr Yan, he comes into this fight, he has 16 pro MMA wins, 7 by knockout, 1 by submission, 8 by decision. Of his 2 losses, he has 2 by decision. Well, he has 3 losses, 2 by decision, 1 by DQ. He comes in this fight, he lost 2 out of his last 3, but you have to put context on that. In his last fight, he lost a split decision to Aljamain Sterling at UFC 273. I actually thought Petr Yan won this fight in real time. I went back and watched it. I still think Petr Yan won this fight. It's not a robbery. I'm not going to cry robbery, but it was clearly second and third round for Sterling, and it was clearly fourth and fifth round for Yan. The first round, up for debate. I thought Yan won the first round, but it was rather uneventful. So it kind of was a coin flip, but I thought Yan landed the better shots and also had octagon control. So I thought Yan should still be the champion. So this could easily be the bantamweight title fight right now. And in this fight, Yan showed that he's still an elite level fighter, but when Aljamain Sterling was able to force those scrambles and get the back of Petr Yan, that kind of showed a little bit of a weakness. But I don't know, though, because Aljamain Sterling is one of the best fighters when he gets your back. So I don't know if that's a massive weakness, and I don't know if Sean O'Malley can exploit that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The fight before that, he fought for the interim bantamweight title against Corey Sandhagen at UFC 267, October of last year. I think Sterling pulled out with a month's notice and Sandhagen stepped in. This was one of my favorite fights of 2021. Super high level fight. Yan just looked next level, made adjustments later in the fight, was landing great shots. I think at one point he rocked Corey Sandhagen with a spinning back fist. Super high level striking match. Amazing fight. and a great quality win over Corey Sandhagen. The fight before that, he lost his title to Aljamain Sterling at UFC 259. This was a fight that Petr Yan was clearly winning. It looked like Petr Yan was going to get the stoppage, and he throws the illegal knee. And we can debate all day whether or not Aljamain Sterling was faking, but at the end of the day, Petr Yan should not have thrown the shot. And it cost him. He lost the fight. He loses by DQ. Aljamain Sterling gets the belt. He has to rematch him and then loses the split decision. To get the belt, he defeated Jose Aldo back at UFC 251. TKO'd him in the 5th round. This was a great fight. This showed how good Petr Yan was. Jose Aldo at bantamweight. A lot of people were burying Jose Aldo when he made the move down to bantamweight. I think Jose Aldo might have been the best he's ever been in the bantamweight division. He looked incredible. He looked good early in this fight. But Petr Yan showed he's just great at making adjustments. He was dropping Jose Aldo, and I think that's how he ended up getting the finish. He dropped him in the 5th round and then just destroyed him with ground and pound on the ground. It was a late stoppage. And even earlier in this fight, Petr Yan hurt him badly after a takedown. I think it was in the 1st round. He took him down, landed a nasty ground and pound body shot, and hurt Aldo and almost finished him, I think, towards the tail end of the 1st round. So Yan is super well-rounded. He's shown it in multiple fights. He could arguably still be the champion. And that's what makes this fight so compelling, because you have a guy that could arguably still be the bantamweight champion versus Sean O'Malley, who's basically untested at this point in the UFC. So when I look at this fight and I try to predict who's going to win, and I try to look at the skill sets, there's just so much that's unknown about Sean O'Malley. And I know people are going to say he's super young. He's 2 years younger than Petr Yan. He's 27. Petr Yan's only 29. So it's just crazy that they're that close in age. That actually shocked me. But there's just so many unknowns about Sean O'Malley. Yes, he has great striking. Yes, he has good power. But against who? The level of competition hasn't been the greatest. And when I look at paths to victory for Sean O'Malley, I really only see one, maybe two. I mean, I think if Sean O'Malley wins this fight, I think he's got to land like a nasty straight right in between the guard of Petr Yan, catch him on the chin, and basically put him to sleep or hurt him so badly and then swarm him and finish him. But I don't think that's super likely. I think Sean O'Malley could also maybe win by decision if he's as good as some of his cult-like followers believe. But I don't think that's super likely. Petr Yan is so good, so technical, so elite, and he's proven he's fought elite level competition. So this is kind of a weird fight to pick, because yes, we know how good Petr Yan is, but at this point, we don't know how good Sean O'Malley is, because he's looked great, but against not great level competition. So this could be his coming out party. I'm not trying to say Sean O'Malley doesn't have a chance. I think Sean O'Malley has a chance, but at this point in time, with the level of opposition, I cannot pick Sean O'Malley. I am going to go Petr Yan via 3rd round TKO. I think the fact that this fight is 3 rounds favors Sean O'Malley, because Petr Yan is great at making late adjustments in fights. You know, we saw in the Aljamain Sterling fight, he lost the 2nd and 3rd round clearly. Comes out and wins the 4th and 5th round and wasn't even scared of the grappling of Aljamain Sterling. And I think this fight is going to be competitive in the 1st round. I think it's going to be Petr Yan landing some leg kicks and making reads on Sean O'Malley. I think Sean O'Malley's going to back up and look to counterpunch the entire fight for the most part. And I think Yan's going to start chopping those legs, working the body, landing some shots. I think O'Malley's going to be pumping the jab, pumping the teep kicks in the 1st round, trying to keep Petr Yan off of him, because Petr Yan likes the pressure. But Petr Yan can just fight in such a variety of ways. He can fight pressuring Sean O'Malley. He can back up and attempt to counter. And I just think the high-level experience of Petr Yan, the high-level opposition that Petr Yan has faced, is just a massive edge for him in this fight. Meanwhile, Sean O'Malley has never fought anyone even close to the skill set of Petr Yan. And I think in this fight, what it's going to look like is Sean O'Malley backing up, Petr Yan pressing forward, chopping the legs, because we've seen in every single fight, the Paiva fight, the Montinho fight, the Almeida fight, the Vera fight, we've seen them all exploit the legs of Sean O'Malley. He has those brittle legs. Petr Yan has some of the best leg kicks in the game. And I think the 1st round is going to be mildly competitive. I think O'Malley will land some shots, but I think he'll be trying to get some reads as well as Petr Yan. Petr Yan will be chopping the legs, backing O'Malley up. O'Malley's looking for counters, but, you know, Petr Yan's so defensively sound. I just don't see O'Malley catching him early and KOing him. And as the fight goes on, Petr Yan's really going to start getting those reads on Sean O'Malley. And in the third round, I think Petr Yan's going to catch him with a combination, drop him, and then finish him with ground and pound. And even on the off chance that, let's say Sean O'Malley comes out there and he's just lighting Petr Yan up on the feet. I know Yan ended up getting out-grappled, for the second and third round of the Aljamain Sterling second fight, but Petr Yan showed amazing grappling in both Aljamain Sterling fights. He showed the ability to take Aljamain Sterling down. He showed the ability to control Aljamain Sterling on the ground as well in multiple instances throughout both of those fights. So I think even in the worst-case scenario where maybe Sean O'Malley's getting the better of him on the striking, I think Petr Yan will look to duck under punches, look to get that body lock, take Sean O'Malley to the ground, and then control him on the ground and win out a decision that way. I could also see Petr Yan winning via decision, maybe, a 30-27 decision with like a close first round. But I think Petr Yan, his elite level experience, meanwhile, Sean O'Malley's never fought close to the level of competition that Petr Yan has. I think Yan's going to have a massive edge in this fight, and I think he's going to finish Sean O'Malley via TKO in the third round. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.